Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Michael, thank you for coming on the show again.
Thanks for having me. I had to dig my equipment out of a drawer to get set up today. So
I'll have you on more often again. Sorry. Just so everybody who's listening knows, you are not really my guest today, but you're more my co host because we're talking about HOAs and condo associations. Being that we're both realtors, we deal with these things all the time. And so I thought you and I could present together as opposed to me just like barfing up a bunch of information about these these two things. So thanks for coming on and being my co-host.
yeah, anything to keep you from barfing, I guess.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, that was a lovely way to start this one. Anyway, okay, so the working title of this episode was HOAs and condo associations: why we love them and why we hate them. Um, but we will definitely go through pros and cons, but the episode is supposed to give you a more holistic view of what these things are. So, what the differences are between the two, which is pretty quick, but we'll go through that. Yes, the pros and cons maybe of having them, and then what you should look for when you're going through the HOA or the condo association documents if you're interested in buying a condo or a home that has an HOA. So first off, I think, and I said this will be really quick, but maybe you can take everyone through what an HOA and a condo association, like what those things are.
Yeah, so an HOA and a condo association both are associations that, by virtue of being an owner in the building or in the development, you are a member of. You have to pay dues to them. Both of them are requirements. You can't opt out. So you in some cases, in smaller associations, like in a condo, you might have to be an officer in the association because you're one of two people or one of three people. But in general, HOAs and condo associations are both associations that manage the development in which you live, and that you pay dues to be a part of.
Right, right. And I used to tell clients like what approximate amount that they would be paying, but it's kind of a slippery slope because they really do depend on one, like what things you have in a building or association. Like if you have a pool or if you have multiple elevators that you have to keep up, then your dues are probably going to be higher. Or if you're in like a super high amenity building where you have 24-hour desk staff and somebody standing at the door, then obviously you have to pay those people. So your dues are going to be higher. So I would say there's no real general rule of thumb, except if you have more amenities, your dues are going to be higher.
Yeah. What I typically tell people is that in a condo building, manpower is expensive. So anytime you have somebody there, whether it be, somebody sitting at a desk from 9 to 5 or somebody sitting at a desk for 24 hours, that's expensive. So, we're going to see a higher rate or a higher condo fee in those buildings. And then also pools are super expensive. All the things you talked about, elevators, those are all expensive items to upkeep. And then older buildings are going to have a higher fee too, because there's more things that have either broken down in the past that they're paying for now, or that are going to break down in the future that they have to pay for, that they're budgeting for. So
Right. And we'll get to that. We'll get to kind of some of that stuff as we go along. But okay, so now we can really talk about the differences. And I can kind of go into and start this. So, HOAs and condo associations, they have, like you said, a lot of similarities potentially, but and of course we're a show that focuses on DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So you're certainly going to see more condo associations than you are HOAs because HOAs are associated with either planned developments. They're like townhomes. If you have, say, you see a string of townhomes that look the same, that may technically be an HOA. Some of them actually are still condos. I represented somebody who moved into a townhome, but it was still condo association. So that's not even a rule of thumb. um, but yeah, so that's kind of the main difference as far as which one you start off with. And, so, I mean, it's a given that if you have a building with multiple units, like a condo building, that will be a condo association. But I guess the point is HOAs could potentially be either depending on the structures and how things are set up.
yeah. And I mean, we could have a whole episode devoted to this as well, but then to that end, they could also be a co-op too. So that's a whole other thing that we will
Yeah.
put to the side because that's a
Yeah.
episode unto itself. I think we've done an episode on that one before, but
Actually, no, we haven't, but it's on my list of episodes is to do co-ops because I feel like they're commonly
that was a teaser.
misunderstood.
That was a teaser for that upcoming episode.
Coming spring 2023. Okay, so when it comes to like the maintenance and repair issues, this is where things kind of get into the nitty gritty a little bit. Like the condo associations are going to deal with things like they're definitely going to deal with like common elements like roofs and lobbies, and they, anything inside for sure, inside that condominium building. But when we start to change for HOAs, that's where it's like if you imagine the townhomes or single family homes, you're talking about sidewalks in between, green spaces in between. So it just covers, I would say, a more robust physical area usually of like the plot where this building or these buildings are.
Yeah, typically it's like once you drive into the townhouse community or into the planned development, usually, and it depends, but like usually even the streets you're driving on are maintained by the townhouse community or the HOA. The playgrounds that you see are owned and operated by the townhouse community. They're reserved for the exclusive use of those people and their guests, etc. So like that's the main difference is if you think of it as like when you drive into the townhome community is like the same as when you walk into that front door of the condo building. Like everything you see is the responsibility of that association.
Right. Right.
So it's not the city that you're calling to complain about the potholes and the street or whatever. It's the townhouse management. So
Right. Right. Okay. So now we can go into the pros and cons of these things. And just to jump ahead here, they're kind of the same. As in, the pros are you have shared responsibilities. So, okay, so let's back up actually, and let's tell people with these associations, there are obviously people who are running it. You can hire a company to run it for you, or frequently you see the members or the owners of these units actually managing the association themselves. And even if you have a management company cannot unilaterally make decisions, important decisions, especially about capital improvements and whatnot. So you have somebody when they're helping you manage doing a lot of the day-to-day stuff that maybe Joe Schmo who lives in his condo doesn't have time to do, but you still have to make decisions about the building, right?
yeah, and if you have a complaint or something, you can't just say like you would to an apartment building and say, "Hey, I'm complaining about the trash being left out," because then what they have to do is then go to the owners and say, "Hey, what do you want to do about this, or how should we?" Like if it's a straight up like, "Oh, so and so left their trash out, let's fine them for it." That's easy. They'll do that unilaterally. But if it's like, oh, they're continuously leaving the trash out, or everyone in the building is leaving their trash in one specific place and that's not where it goes, they can't just say like, hey, you have to move it. Like it has to be a building wide decision. Like there has to be, there's limits to what their power is, basically.
Right. Right. But if we're talking about positive, so like really what we're comparing here is like a condo and association versus none, right? And when you don't have one, that means that it's usually means you have a single family house that's not part of an HOA. And when you have a single family house, you are doing everything. There's a problem, you are fixing it. I mean, you can hire people to help you with that stuff too. Kind of like you can have companies to help you with the condo association, but let's just pretend that that's not happening. You have to do everything yourself. So you have to be planning for what could go wrong. You are paying for the new HVAC system on your own. You're paying for the new roof on your own. You're paying for all of the landscaping on your own, and you're planning it on your own, right? Like it's you. And when you have an HOA, again, we're talking about a pro here, you have a shared responsibility with, let's just say we're in a 20 unit building. There are 20 other people who are going to be helping with that expense. There are maybe some people in that association who are better at certain things than others. Like, for example, you are better at, probably design aesthetics and things, that would need to be done in a building. So maybe people would lean on you a little bit for that. In my building, I'm in a small building. I'm the only realtor. So I generally just have a wider experience when it comes to all of the things, about real estate. So people will come and lean on me for various reasons. So I'd say that that's a pro,
Yeah.
right? And,
Yeah.
part of something that's happening, we'll get to this a little bit later, is that condo associations and HOA are mandated to put money into a fund that sits there to pay for not only the day-to-day expenses of the building, but those large things that we're talking about that can really sneak up on you if you're a homeowner in a single family house.
Right.
And
And so, I mean, as a general rule, people always say this where they're like, oh, well, if I buy a condo, I have this HOA fee or this condo fee. But if I buy a single family home, I save that money because I don't have to put that away, which is not right because, you still need to squirrel away money for maintenance and whatnot. It's just that once the maintenance comes up, you're on the hook for paying it as opposed to, an HOA, which is almost like a forced bank account where it's like, I'm going to pay my condo fee. And then the treasurer or the management company is going to put a certain amount, usually around 3%, away to pay for those big items that might come up. And you might do a reserve study, which is a whole other bag of worms, and find out, oh, our roof is about to need to be replaced, or we need the brick repointed on the building, and the fees may go up commensurate with that amount of money, so that when it does come up due to be replaced, you have enough money in the bank account to do it, so that you don't have an assessment. Because an assessment can be a big hit because it could be, let's say your condo fee is $300, an assessment could be $400, which means that your monthly fee is $700, and that's a whole
right.
other bag of worms.
So let's just very quickly explain to people what a special assessment is. So a special assessment, let's say you need a new roof, you've got of the building, you've got $10,000 in reserve. You can't gut that whole amount because you still need operating expenses for the building. And so let's say you can spend 7,000 of it. It's going to cost 20. So where are you going to get the delta, the $13,000? You would split that up amongst the number of units that you have. Usually it's not, it's an even split. It's depending on the amount of square footage you have, which is, what percent of the building basically you own, or, have control of. And so, that would be a 20th of that, in this case, of that $13,000, which is significantly less than having to replace a roof on your own. Now, I know people might be saying, well, the cost of a roof on a large building is going to be more than a single family house. Sure. But you're still going to be paying less in this situation than if you have to replace a whole roof on a house. Almost definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I do get asked a lot about HOAs and condo associations. So the condo association doesn't own the building. It is the association that kind of the owners of the building. So when you pay into your condo fees, your association is going to then pay for the maintenance of the building. The association is going to pay for the water bill and the light bill and stuff like that. But they don't own the building. You own the building. So you own, in your example, 1/20th of the building. But you're paying into this association. It's just like if you were, I guess, a realtor. The realtor association, we pay dues into that. They don't own, the realtors. We pay into it to be a part of an association that then speaks on our behalf, essentially. So
Right.
It's kind of similar in that regards, except that's kind of a weird analogy, but that's fine. But then the other thing is that sometimes to make these big expenses, if there's a huge expense, a building can, based on because they are in most cases an LLC, can take a loan out, and then you're responsible for whatever percentage of that loan commensurate to your amount that you own of the building. So there's a couple different things. It is a very complicated legal entity that can do a lot of different things with finances that you or I can't necessarily do. Like get a $200,000 loan to replace a commercial roof.
Everything.
That sort of
Yeah. Okay. So if we talk about the negatives of HOAs and condo associations, it's kind of the same thing. So you've got shared responsibilities with, in my example, again, 19 other people, if I'm one of 20, who all have different experiences, different wants and needs. You've got people who don't necessarily want the same things. For me, I am the person in the building who wants to do everything that we can, even if it's slightly preemptive, to keep the building working and looking as nice as possible, because I think that it will help resale if any of us want to sell. My angle is from a real estate angle. Whereas you have people who defer to do things, or they want to try to put a band-aid on before they go, they try to patch the roof instead of replacing the roof. To be honest, there's not a right or a wrong way, but almost every time people think that theirs is the right way, right? Like, I am pretty dead set on doing all of the things right when it's suggested that maybe we do them. And then I've got people on the other side of the spectrum. So
this is a good situation for a property manager, where they can kind of say, like, they can kind of give you a barometer of like, okay, like, yes, this will help for right now. No, this, won't be a long-term solution, blah, blah, blah. But also at the same time, it becomes a much bigger issue with like 3 units or 4 units or 5 units. I'd say up to like 10, where like the 1 or 2 people who are sticklers for saving money and not spending money can really impact the entire building, because their weight matters more. And this gets even more complicated because most condo associations are weighted not by just the straight units in the building. They're weighted by your square footage. So let's say like those 1 or 2 cheap people who don't want to do any maintenance to the building
they live in the larger units in the building, and they end up having more say. Yeah.
More say. And usually that doesn't come into play until like you get into a really contentious issue where like somebody's like, well, I have a bigger percentage, therefore my vote matters more. Usually like small associations are run like all those in favor, all those opposed, until you get into a situation that's like your percentage matters.
Yeah. And we're not trying to like poo-poo this or anything, but it's basically like an exercise in human relationships when you're in a condo association, or dealing with an HOA. Like, you just have more cooks in the kitchen. And again, maybe you have a cook that's really good is really good at pastry, and a cook who's really good at, pasta, and somebody else is good on the grill. Like, that can be great until you're not working together as a team anymore. And then it's like a completely disjointed meal. So we did want to point out the pros and the cons, because going in and thinking it's just positive or just negative is really not helpful. And it's not realistic, right? Like, you can have both.
I recently had a client who moved from like a huge building into a 4-unit building, and he was amazed. He's like, I was shocked at how much work went into running a building. He's like, it's crazy because like with the big buildings, you have a lot of more diversity with what you're dealing with. So it's like, diluted, I think is the word I was looking for. It's much more diluted in the responsibilities, whereas with a 4-unit or a 3-unit, it's down to a couple people who are dealing with it. So
right. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the fact that, again, there are, specifically in DC, we have, maybe it's a short list, but a list of property management companies that can help with these things. Some are better with small associations versus big associations. You mentioned one in particular.
Yeah. We've had Lisa Wise from Roost on the podcast before, and she has a boot camp is what I call it, but basically where she can kind of say like, she doesn't have to take over your association or manage your association, but her people can teach you like what you need to know in order to run an association effectively, or how to do a reserve study, or who to talk to do XYZ. So you're not like necessarily paying a monthly management fee. You're saying like, okay, we want to send all of our small association officers to this boot camp so that they know what they're looking for and what they should be doing and what the appropriate way to run an association is. So you come out the other end knowing what to do, essentially. But then they can also run the whole association for you and not have to worry about it. So
yeah. Okay, so the last part of this episode is we want to tell people what they should be looking for when they are going through condo and HOA documents when they are purchasing. I know we've mentioned this on another episode, but there is a 3-day right if it's an existing building, you have, as in it's not new, you have 3 days to go through and look at all of the documents that we're about to mention, and you can't change these documents. So it's important that you have these 3 days to evaluate and make sure that everything in them is acceptable to you, I guess is the best way to put it. That you're okay with it, or if you're not okay with it, that you understand what you're, what's happening in the building to maybe remedy something. So, okay, so let's go through. So do you want to start with, the first thing you think people should be looking at?
I mean, I think the first thing that you should look at is, and this is what I tell people, is that, look at anything that impacts you. So like if you are planning to rent this unit out in the near future or in the far future or ever, look at the rental restrictions. If you are planning to have a dog or a cat or a guinea pig or whatever, look at the pet restrictions, the pet policies. These are all things that are going to impact you directly. And then kind of go through everything else and kind of see what other things are that stick out to you. We're not lawyers, so we can't really tell you what to look for from a legal perspective, but I think that that's the biggest things to look at. And then we can talk about the finances in a second, but the finances are a whole other category of things that you want to look at specifically.
Yeah.
But then as far as those things go, as far as the rules go, you just want to make sure that all the rules of the building kind of jive with what you plan to do with it and what your vibe is, I guess. So
Right. And so what we would summarize these as are the CCRs, or the conditions and restrictions of the building, and the homeowners association bylaws. So the CCRs are more everything that you have to follow in the development or in the building. And like you said, that can be like alterations that you can do or can't do. How many pets you can have. Sometimes if there's breed restrictions, that's where you'll find all that stuff. And that's one of the two things I think people find the most important, is just that general document or series of documents. The homeowners association bylaws are more how the association operates. So if you're like, I'm moving into this condo, I love it, but I am absolutely never going to be on the board, you should look at those association bylaws, because it might be required that, you're in a small building and that they switch officers every 2 years. So, the laws of mathematics tell you you're going to have to be on that board at some point. So it's, you should know that going in. Like in the case of me and my fiance, he was like, I'm not going to do any of that stuff, but just somebody from a unit has to take on that role. So I said, okay, clearly I'm in a position to do that kind of thing anyway, because I'm comfortable with all the things we're talking about. But that's definitely something to pay attention to. And then the
before you
last
get
thing,
stuck being the treasurer and you can't add 2 + 2.
you don't know how to add. Yeah. And so the other thing that you kind of implied and started talking about is the budget and the financial statements. And this covers, this is really important. And the thing I would mention about this is the one thing that is potentially easy to change, because I would say most associations do not want to be in a position where they get kind of, they're in a position where they have to do massive special assessments. Nobody wants that. And so the fact of the matter is, you can even bring this up. I've had people bring this up during the review period to say, like, this is just not a sufficient amount of money, and they're like, oh yeah, we have a plan, and it may have been referenced in the meeting minutes, which is something we'll get to in a second. But anyway, so the budget, so you're looking at day-to-day operating expenses, right? So if you have that person who's working at the front desk, like approximately how much is that? You can break it down to today, but how much is it per year? Maintenance costs and the utilities. You got to have the lights on in the building. I'm not paying my unit's electric bill. That's coming from a general, fund, your reserve fund. So you might also see in there that there seems to be unnecessary expenses. Like, why are we paying for, I don't know, laundry services to come to the building that no one's using, or, whatever. And because we're not saving that much, and it's a 15-year-old building, and we're probably going to need to start replacing some things. So it really gives you an awesome idea what's happening in the building from the financial perspective, right?
Yeah, and there's also a thing called deficiencies within the condo documents, where most will show you if there's any condo units that are deficient in their condo dues. And that's a good indication, I mean, of how the building is ran. If there's a bunch of units that are deficient and haven't paid, that's a red flag. I mean that, yeah. I mean, we could do some of those great TikToks. That's a red flag. So yeah, I mean, for sure, I think that would be a big thing to look at in the condo budget, is just to see who owes money and where,
Yeah.
and how much money is going into those reserves.
Right. And then the last thing I really want to, I quickly want to mention, which I just implied again, are the HOA meeting minutes. So for me, these are actually like, I think these are eye-opening. One, they may even mention like contentious issues between between various members, which, you know, you might say, I don't want any drama in my life, and you may have a front row seat to seeing what has happened. You know, one said two, unit two said blah, you know, back and forth.
Oh, I live for
And you
it.
just get up to speed. You just get up to speed on what the condo association or the HOA is dealing with. That's where you might see, okay, in the budget, there is a large reserve, right? But people are discussing whether or not that reserve should go towards major updates in the parking garage versus the roof, both of which are getting to the end of their life expectancy. And so you kind of understand where things are at. It gives context usually to the budget and the CCRs. People might be discussing that actually they want to change the pet policy, or that they want to change something that we said, you know, 5 minutes ago. I said, when you're going to buy a place, you can't change these things. And what I meant is, you can't change those things when you're buying, right? But once you join and you become a member of this association, especially if you end up being on the board, then you typically have some ability to potentially change things. Don't go in it thinking you definitely will, but you know, because you're a member at that point, you have a say.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that the absence of meeting minute notes is also kind of telling. And I would say with small associations, it's not as rare. I've sold 1 million to 3-unit building condos where they're like, we don't take minutes. We really don't meet. We just kind of see each other outside and go, hey, we should do this. And that's our meeting. Or we'll like send each other a group text, and then that's the meeting. You know, so that can be very telling of a poorly run building, but it can also just mean that they're just friendly and, you know, they have a good relationship. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily take the absence of meeting minute notes as a red flag, but I would say, like, I would ask the question. I would ask the follow-up question, like, hey, where are these meeting minutes? Like, why? And then usually they'll come back to you with, oh, they just kind of are very casual about it. And that could be something, again, like you said before, that you could go on and change. And you could be like, okay, we need to have like some semblance of meeting minutes.
Something in writing. Yeah. Probably a good idea. Anyway, okay, so that is our episode on HOAs and condo associations. If anybody has any questions, Michael and I are both excellent resources for this. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you're going through a real estate transaction, your realtor should be a huge resource for you on all of this. And a lot of us have lived in condos ourselves, realtors. And so we could speak from both angles. So anyway, thank you, Michael, for coming on. And I'll definitely be linking your information in the show notes. And hopefully I'll see you in an episode soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.